Unsolved and Unseen, the podcast where the shadows hold secrets and the unspeakable waits to be discovered. From chilling mysteries to forgotten tales, join us as we uncover the stories the world has left behind. Are you ready to step into the unknown?
Welcome to episode 2 of Unsolved and Unseen, the podcast where we delve into chilling mysteries, true crime, and the unexplained events that keep us up at night. I'm Chris, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, Octavio.
Yeah. Hey, Chris. Appreciate it, man. Definitely got an exciting one. Really nail-biting just on this guy's entire story. But, yeah, kick it off.
Yeah, so he was a man who confessed to 21 murders, over 1,000 acts of sexual assault, countless robberies, arsons, yet his life story is about as much about crime as it is about failures of the system that created him. This is the story of Carl Panzram, a self-proclaimed human animal. In today's episode, we'll dive into the twisted mind of Charles, aka Carl Panzram, his upbringing, his violent escapades, his philosophy on life, and the role that society played in shaping him. So let's get started. So, I mean, initial thoughts from me. To be fair, this is not going to be an exploration of the crimes necessarily that he committed. Obviously, that's going to be an important part. But one of the cool things that we got from reading his autobiography, which is our main source material for this week, is that we kind of got to see, again, into his mind, and we got to, a look at some of the reasons why he did what he did, and his self-proclaimed or self-professed reasons why he has the philosophy that he has. And it is due in large part to his upbringing. It is due in large part to the penal system at the time, right? This is turn of the century U.S. penal system, right? And as we all know, I mean, from Fort Leavenworth to Alcatraz, we didn't exactly have the best idea of how to reform or rehabilitate prisoners. We still don't, to be fair, but it was a lot worse back at the turn of the century, right? So think late 1800s, early 1900s, and it's really interesting. It kind of gives a human element to this criminal that a lot of people think back on and just think complete animal, right? Criminal. Homeless person, whatever, they attribute all these labels to this guy. But he is more than that, right? He's not an idiot. Obviously, he wrote a whole book. He wrote an entire autobiography with the help of a couple of folks, which we'll get into a little bit later. But he's quite articulate. So I don't know, what were your first impressions?
Yeah, no, Chris, you summed it up great, man. Honestly, from beginning to end, man, there's no way you can skip any part of Carl Panzram's story and just get to the end and just have a really good understanding of what made this, quote unquote monster or serial killer, right? I think it really required, meticulous understanding of from some of the stuff that we'll get into on his upbringing all the way down to the last letters that he gives to the friend, if you will, by his definition, which was actually a guardsman at one of the prisons that he stayed at, that he kept in touch, and that kind of explained what was in this guy's mind, what made him commit these heinous crimes, or even petty theft, So yeah, I think that's a perfect segue, right? It's you just can't skip ahead, right? Or you can't just hear the beginning of Carl Panzram, who, if you're following along on YouTube or just listeners, you can look up any images on this guy, and yeah, it's, at initial thought, hey, looked like a regular older gentleman, but yeah, when you start to hear about his story, man, it's crazy. It's wild how this guy was, across across the globe, and I really do mean across the globe, which we'll get into as well.
Yeah, and it was. I'll be honest, it was an enjoyable read, albeit
Yeah.
shocking because it's all true. But it was an enjoyable read. I mean, this guy had a roller coaster of a life. So yeah, I'll take it away for where it all started.
Yeah, no, Chris, thanks. Yeah. So really, I had a couple photos just showing Carl Panzram, later on. But as you said, I think we have to kick it off really with his early life and his upbringing. Right. He was born in June 28, 1891. He was, as defined back in those days, a poor Minnesota farm, worker. Raised by poor Minnesota farm workers. They were actually, from German descent. That entire family. His father, very early on, while they were, rather large family, several boys, one sister, and Carl being the youngest, actually really went through some hardships. And his father kind of abandoned them, or really, just started slowly, getting drunk, or taking odd jobs, never really, supporting the family throughout. Was what they described as like a dreamer. Always wanted to pursue something else, pursue something different, achieve grander things. But it's almost like the family anchored him, right? So that being said, it was after Carl Panzram was born, not even several years later, that his dad literally left the family, and it left Carl's mother to manage not only the farm, the small farm that they had, and the land that they had, but left him with all the kids, right? Then what you end up finding out really early on, and I'm talking about Carl's recollection is like as early as like a 5-year-old. He remembers working tirelessly as a child, and something that I know I can relate to, hearing from how my parents were raised and my grandparents were raised coming into the United States, was that description of what it was like in the past. Again, this is late 1800s. This is pre-truancy laws, right, where children can go and work out on the farms, go to school, come back and work, and that's exactly what Carl's upbringing was. And in those time frames, he was always facing frequent beatings. Right. The reality is he was smallest kid, at the farm, youngest of a family, and smallest child, going to school, so it was cruelty, every which way, everywhere he turned. Right. Some of those things kind of led into what he would later on explain, and I know we'll get into is why he felt like those were the early signs of some of the criminality, or what made him, create some criminal acts. And in fact, I think he mentions that like when he was 5 or 6 years old, he remembers his first burglary. Right? It was, it was like he remembers like taking stuff, from the schoolhouse, taking stuff from the farm, and just getting brutally beat up, whether it was older siblings, other farm workers, you name it. Another burglary that he recalls at a young age was around 11, where even not only was it like a brutal punishment, but he was incarcerated for it at 11 years old, right? And some people would actually have notes talking about between 5 to 11 he was actually incarcerated several times. Now he doesn't describe it all, like all these cases, but in every single occasion he was actually known as like a childhood drunk at that age. Imagine.
Yeah, I think I remember reading the first time he got caught drinking was like when he was about 11 years old. He was drunk as a skunk, and
that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah. So yeah, he had attributes like a lot of those childhood lessons to hey, this is slowly but surely what shaped me. I mean, he brings up his first quote, that kind of really helped shape his life, or his young childhood. He was like, hey, might makes right. Right. The reason why he was taking all these beatings, the reason why he was getting beat up by all these individuals, is because they were stronger, they were bigger, and it's their might that makes it right.
And so I think it's important to highlight. I mean, you've kind of gone over it a couple times, but to explicitly state, and I mean, especially the stuff that we know now about raising a child. And again, we'll get into it later. Carl himself figured it out later on, but his childhood was highlighted by a complete lack of compassion a complete
Yeah.
lack of love, a complete lack of companionship. I mean, he described his mother as dumb,
Yeah.
didn't teach him anything, i.e., didn't spend any time with him. His older brothers didn't spend any time with him. The only time they did spend with him, they're beating him up or ordering him around, just generally not being nice. So yeah, he almost kind of lacks human contact for a long time, and the only human contact that he did have was very negative,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
negative.
No, completely. Yeah. I mean, negative is exactly right, man. I mean, he was, notable quote that he mentioned was, from a young age, I was a thief and a liar. And the older I got, the meaner I got. That's all he knew, man. That's all he knew. So that's really kind of Carl Panzram, kind of just setting that stage of what it was like, back in the late 1800s. Again, pre-truancy laws, dealing with neglect, basically, fatherless upbringing, dealing with the, early criminality that he was doing, the tremendous amount of abuse, and of course the hardship. This is during a time frame where the country is dealing with some serious financial depression. Strikes are going on, and yeah, he's already getting a hardened worldview of life, right? So I think, Chris, what's next is, we kind of get into more of like, yeah, I think, me and you talked about this, right? The book, one of the, book, if anybody, gets the opportunity to read it, quite honestly, I think it's a must read, right?
And was it called Killer Journal of a what was
Journal
it?
of a Murder, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly. In fact,
He's
they
not listed as the author though, is he?
Correct. Yeah. And we'll talk why, like the reality is he befriended a guard that just, kept pursuing, to get his story out. But, it starts with, some of the, in some of those early letters, he talks about it, right? He brings up, his first turning point, which was, he describes it kind of the descent into violence, right? Which was that Minnesota State Training School, right? It was
Do you remember how did he get there? Do you remember? He
uh,
did something.
yeah, no, in fact, it was right after he had committed a couple petty thefts, some robberies, and quite honestly, I think it was like one big theft that caused them to, like, all right, let's send him to a reform school, because there was no such thing as jail pre that age, right? So Minnesota Training School was like their best alternative, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess if you ever don't know why Carl Panzer, because he was in and out of prison all his
Yeah.
life, like
Yeah.
hundreds of times.
Yeah.
If you ever don't know why he went to prison, it's either he burned something, he killed somebody, he raped somebody,
Stole
or
something.
he
Yeah.
stole something.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's his
Yeah.
whole life.
Yeah, it's crazy. And he got there early on, and right away he was subject to abuse, man. I mean, dude, I don't know if you remember. Do you remember the paint shop? Like that was insane, right?
Yeah.
He immediately talked about, hey, as soon as I got there, I mean, he admitted he was a hellion. He was, nothing was going to probably change him. It was
He was a what?
a hellion, so it was like,
What is a hellion? I've never heard
oh
of that.
yeah, man. Oh, dude, rebellion, but like mischievous, like little hellraiser.
You just made up a word, didn't
No,
you?
no, man.
I'm Googling that right now.
Yeah, completely
Hellion.
hellraiser, so.
Oh, a troublesome or mischievous person. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
All right.
yeah. That's him, man.
Oh, Middle English, huh?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
No, I don't know. Is it really? Yeah. Yeah, so. No, he describes the paint shop, man, dude. Like that was intense. That was intense. Like it was, just to kind of, explain a little bit, it was a punishment area where children were basically like whipped and treated with like a salt water. Now I gotta describe it, man. It was, they basically grabbed like this 2 to 4 inch paddle, and with like circular holes, kind of like cut, within each part of the paddle. But the idea was that they would put like a water sheet, that was like salt over their back, bend the kids over, tie them down to, either bed or, a door, something just where they were just bent over, couldn't move, completely tied down. And they would essentially whip them with this paddle, again, with the holes in it. And as Carl would explain it, is they did it so much that to the point where your skin would, go through these paddles and create blisters. So if you didn't think the whipping was enough, imagine now that the blisters are now popping or bleeding, and then the salt water is running down your back, going straight into these injuries. Yeah, dude, I'm telling you, like
Straight torture. That's
this,
straight torture.
and this is a Christian Reformed training school, so
Yeah. Well, that's important too. It's Christian, isn't it?
yeah. So he talks about that, right? In fact, that's another thing, right? It's like, hey, for people who are extremely religious and all about Christianity, it's like, why am I getting more abuse? Why am I getting all this mistreatment? Why am I getting misfed or horrible dietary or
Yeah. And these
nutrition?
kids they're not even doing bad stuff,
They're
man.
not.
It's like, oh, you looked up from your homework,
Yeah,
or you said something out of turn, or you're whispering in class.
yeah.
And you get the paint shot. Like,
Yep, that's it. Yeah, the paint shop with the kid,
they're
right?
hard they're hardline
Yeah.
folks here.
Yeah, so you can imagine, man. Here's this kid, just had this horrible upbringing. Family's just completely mess. They send him off to military training school, and it's you're thinking, okay, it's going to be reformation, but it's just like, no, man, I just got more abuse, and so what am I dealing with now? You get all these mixed feelings. I mean, I would at that age, you're dealing with all this kind of neglect, no respect, all this physical abuse, from elders to teenagers, who are beating him up and bullying him. So it's like, dude, now there's what do you immediately do? Lack of respect to authority, lack of respect of religion, because you're trying to grind in all of this, and it's just not working, man. It's going in one ear
Yeah.
out the other.
I feel like it turns into like a me versus you sort of mentality.
Yeah.
Like, you're the one beating me. Fuck you.
Yep.
Fuck everybody you work with.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do everything I can to make life hard for you.
Well, it's funny that you say that. I'll tell you an example of like him getting back or immediate revenge. Oh, dude, I don't know. Do you remember Do you remember what he did to the officers? Did you read that piece?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of funny.
Yeah,
You could get back. Kind of lick back.
Yeah, man, it's a nervous tick right there. But I was like laughing because I was like, man, definitely got his early on revenge. But he urinated in the officer's soup. He poisoned a little bit of the food. Now that was a little bit bad, but it wasn't like rat poison enough. Although he did attempt that later on, and he got caught and almost like kicked out basically. But he did enough like poison just to like upset their stomachs. And then he also. Oh man, what was it? He also
He jerked off. He jerked off in the food too,
dude,
and then he would stand right next to him as
masturbating in the ice cream. Yeah, masturbating in the ice cream. I'm like, dude, and literally watched him. He was like, yeah, if they only could read this now, that they, I watched them enjoy the food. It's like crazy, man.
Some Bart Simpson type of shit, right?
Yeah. There. So then, then what happens? I think as I told you, he gets kicked out, man. They tried, dealing with him, handling. Eventually, he describes it as that, like, okay, if I'm getting all this, if I'm being lied to, and I see all this distrust, he plays the game, right? He learns from an older kid to play the game, man. Act like you're super religious, act like you believe in all this stuff, but we all know like this is a load of crock. Essentially, is how Carl's describing it, right? Don't believe in any of this. Don't really learn to trust anyone. So he does that. He starts lying, he starts, faking it. And, he's reformed, as you will. And they send him back home. Doesn't last long, man. As Chris, as you said it, man. And this guy's in and out of, training camp or training academies, prisons, you name it, throughout his entire life. Well, same thing, right? He gets out, you think he's reformed, and immediately he has trouble with like a preacher, right? That scene was intense, right? Like, he's like super descriptive, talks about like all the things that he's ready to do with him, definitely premeditated. And what's he do? Grabs a pistol, puts it up to the preacher's head, and tries to shoot him 3 times. Completely misfired every single time. So yeah, I know what. Yeah, like immediately, like they comes home, and his older brother, instead of thinking like, okay, not you got it. Pistol's next level, definitely up there. I mean, you're about to, commit, murder, or he attempted murder, right? I definitely understand that, but he immediately comes home and gets, like, as he describes it, the beating of his life, like literally left to near death type beating, as he describes it. So he's like, dude, screw this, I'm out. Like, crappy upbringing, dealt with that military training school, not going back, or Minnesota State Training School, not going back. tried coming back here to reform, and then continued to get mistreated by my family. So he takes off, man. And what's he do? Like, he's now what, 13, 14 years old, and
Yep.
he encounters like, one of the first like horrible acts that you can commit on a kid, in my opinion, right? Which is he meets these group of men as he flees his family.
He's not so
Yeah,
okay. I think to paint the picture here a little bit,
yeah,
a lot of times what people that are fleeing the law
yeah,
or vagrants or hobos or
yeah,
anybody that's even slightly kind of touches the underworld or crime or whatever, at this time, one of the best forms of mobility was the railroad,
oh yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so the railroad was already like a pretty prominent thing across the United
mm-hmm.
States. And as you know, Octavio, if you don't want to get pinched, if you don't want to get killed,
Yeah.
you got to stay mobile, right? You got to
Yep.
maneuver, you got to move. And
Yeah.
so that's where a lot of vagrants and criminals and stuff, they would all kind of congregate around the America's rail system.
Yeah.
And you get that kind of archetype of the rail car hobo or
Yeah,
whatever, somebody
yeah.
that just hops in a rail car and takes it wherever we're going, and
Yeah.
I'll just hop off whenever I want.
And the criminal activity, right? And the criminal activity, right? Like, that's what it bred, right? Not only did it bred like transient people, but like all the criminals that go along with it that are, like you said, trying to get mobile. Now, I think that's important, man, because I probably would have gone straight into, again, just kind of tells you like how awkward this like next piece is, man. It was kind of intense, like reading it, because again, he gets very descriptive on his first two encounters of, getting raped, right? And that's exactly what happens. He describes like I think what was known as the time is the wobblies, right? Some industrial workers of the world. I literally had to like look this up, but that was like a phrase they used for some of those, gangs or criminals that were constantly like hanging around the rail yards and just going from, place to place to find just limited work, commit more crime, move on, do whatever they wanted.
They had a lot of she kind of terms.
Yeah, he did. Well, I think that's kind of what happened, right? He, his first sexual assault was a group of men, that tried, he confided in, went and walked, told them, he was even being nice, man. I don't know if you remember, but he goes up to them and was like, "Hey, man, like you guys are kind of cold over here. That the next like stage car over, is like, or the box car over. It's good. It's warm. Y'all should come over." And they're like, "Yeah, sure, man." He describes it. They all get friendly, stand up, start walking him over there, and then, yeah, unfortunately, man, like they rape him. It's weird. He's very particular about saying they commit sodomy, right? He never says rape. He never says, he never talks about his sexuality. He never talks about, you're saying sex, right? It's always like sodomy, right? It was, even though those terms were definitely prevalent at the time, that's how he describes it, right? They committed sodomy on him, right?
So well, you got to think he's a kid that has had years of religious trauma dumped into his brain. So I think sodomy is probably, the prominent term for him, especially at this time. So, he's going through religious trauma and now, sexual trauma too. So,
And he says, you would think that he had learned by then. He thought it was just maybe a one time. He still probably has like, at this point, some level of trust in humanity. Maybe that was a one off, but he'll never like, find himself alone, or I'm sorry, he'll always, he'll from there on out, he'll definitely travel alone and definitely never try to, find himself in that position. Well, not even like, weeks later or months later, I think he's like, sees a group of guys, they're hanging out, just, about to pick up the next, train heading out. And, they invite him over, right? They, tell him to drink, he's having a little bit too much alcohol. Again, mind you, he's 13, 14 years old, not really tracking what's going on. He's confined, he's trusting in, these adults, that, he thinks that they're taking care of him. They're treating him nice with respect and everything. But no, what he soon to find out, as he claims, is like, he thought what was a good afternoon of drinking and eating and sharing stories wakes up the next morning knowing that, he had been raped, right? So he has this famous reflection, right? He tells, the guard through all these letters that you'll find out later is, "Hey, what they couldn't get by moral persuasion, they proceeded to get by force. Learned really early on, never again was I trusting of human or mankind. I was like, oh man, dude, super impactful statements, man. And I think with that, Chris, I think it sets the stage of okay, well, what's next, man? Has he learned from it? He gets a little bit older, he gets wiser. Tell us, man, what's a little bit about that, early adulthood that I know it's going to be a roller coaster ride.
Yeah. So I mean, he's kind of on the lam, I guess you can say, for a couple of years and just going around the United States. And he makes a habit of moving a lot. And one of the interesting things, the way he writes, is he's so very matter of fact about a lot of the stuff that he does. So, in one sentence, he'll say, I robbed this person. The next sentence, he's in a different city, in a different state, robbing somebody else. So it almost kind of, it makes it a little bit difficult to kind of decipher what his movements are. And I mean, obviously he's writing this as a 37-year-old guy. He's probably not remembering everything perfectly. I'm sure, especially considering how much trauma he went through. I don't know how much of it he repressed, how much of it he might have made up. Maybe, I don't know. Again, he's not a very, I guess, not a very reliable narrator, right? In literary terms, you have your reliable narrators and your unreliable. I would say he's probably leans more on the side of unreliable narrators. But in any case, for a couple of years, he's on the lam. He's running around, committing burglaries, fighting, getting in tons of fights. I mean, that was one of his bread and butter moves, right? Is to fight people. Well, he makes and Octavio, you might be able to kind of relate to this a little bit. He makes the mistake of enlisting in the army.
Definitely been there. Definitely been there.
Yep. So 16 years old, early 1900s, he decides to enlist in the U.S. Army. Of course, that doesn't last very long. I mean, he continues in his ways, robbing and fighting and doing all this stuff. So he commits some thefts and some disobedience, which, as you know, doesn't last very long in the Army. And he gets sentenced to go to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, right, which is our biggest military prison, still around today. And it's kind of funny because he sees him a little bit later on in his life, but at the time, Secretary of War, I think it was the position was called.
Who sent
William? Yep, William Howard Taft was the one that signed the letter saying that he's going to Fort Leavenworth for a total of 3 years. And he does. So he goes to Fort Leavenworth, and it's a lot more of the same. Basically, it's a lot more of the stuff that he saw in the Minnesota State reform facility. It's real hard, and this particular prison was punctuated by extremely hard labor. Right? They didn't necessarily believe in a ton of punishments here at Fort Leavenworth, right? Because it's very militaristic. So the worst thing that can happen is you go on bread and water and you maybe get locked up by yourself for a day or two, because obviously the Army has the maximum sentences, maximum punishments that you can give prisoners, right? So, but the labor was enough, quite frankly. And he described one of his daily work, right, is going from the barracks, walking 3 miles as part of a chain gang to a rock quarry where he's swinging an 18-pound sledgehammer for 8.5 hours every single day, right, for years, and then walking back. And of course, he's always trying to escape. That he's actually a really good escape artist. I got to be honest with you. I mean, he escaped a lot of prisons. So he knew what he was doing, man. He knew how to pick a lock, and he was always carving through bars and stuff like that. So he was really good at escaping. But anyways, he did something. He tried to escape, or he stole something, or got in a fight, or whatever. His punishment, right, was to carry a 50-pound ball. I think, what do they call it? Carrying the baby.
Carrying the baby. I highlighted that. That was insane. Carrying the baby. I'm like, what the?
Yep. So they chained a 50-pound kettlebell to this guy's ankle for 6 months. Never once took it off, and he had to do the same daily duties every single day. That means an extra 50 pounds that you gotta front carry out of your barracks. You gotta put it in your wheelbarrow. You gotta put your 18-pound sledgehammer in. You gotta put your crowbar in. You gotta put your pickaxe in. And you gotta follow the fucking marching gang all the way 3 miles. By the way, 3 miles to the rock quarry. Do your 8.5 hours of work, and then do the same thing.
3 miles back. Dude. Yeah,
holy smokes.
Yeah, he got big. I was looking for that photo. I was like, man, where's that one? Like it was just happened to be like during a time where but that was another thing. Is like, what alias was he in at Fort Leavenworth? Like what didn't he have? I think it was like the Jeff Davis or the John O'Leary. But yeah, I was like, man, where's the photo that shows ripped Carl, Panzram?
Oh man,
it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah. So excuse me. So he got pinched at 16, right? Mm-hmm. Talking 17, 8. So he's like right around like peak physicality, right? Maybe a couple years away. He's like 18, 19 years old, and he's doing this hard labor every single day. Granted, he's not eating a lot, but he's getting strong.
Yeah.
He's getting strong. He mentioned that a couple times. Yeah.
Crazy.
He's like, he was like, I'm going to be able to beat so many people up. I mean, that was his actual thought process. I mean, in so many words, that's what he said. But yeah, so for 6 months, he does this punishment, continues to try to escape, is not able to. So he ends up doing his full 3 years at Fort Leavenworth, and he gets out. And basically what happens when you get out of prison back in the old days, to be fair, I don't really know what happens when you get out of prison now. They give you a set of clothes, they give you $5, and they give you a train ticket to the next town over.
Yep.
And the next town over for him was Denver, Colorado. I mean, that's not the next town over.
Yeah,
right?
One he chose for sure.
Yeah, but that's another thing, and you brought it up earlier. There's no at this time. There's no federal sort of police force. Right? There's no FBI. It hasn't been formed yet.
Yep.
And it kind of seems like a lot of cities or municipalities, police departments are not talking to each other. Definitely. And if they do, it's just to the guys right next to them.
Yep.
So I guess his main move, like one of his main moves, was to change his name, walk like 3 cities that way, or take a train that way, and just start all over again. Right? Start stealing stuff, hitting people, try to get some work, some money, whatever. And nobody ever was the wiser for it for a long time. So anyways, he gets out. He goes to Denver to work the railroads, right? Which is kind of perfect for him, not going to lie. Railroads are very harsh working conditions. He just got out of some really harsh working conditions. Railroad workers are like, kind of rough and tumble guys. He's kind of a rough and tumble guy. He likes fighting. And actually, at one point, he mentions the fact that so rail workers are just obviously, very rough and tumble guys. And he tries his hand fighting them.
Yeah.
And he mentions it. He said there was like a group of 2 or 3 of them, and they're going to test him to see how well he could scrap. And he's like, yeah, I can scrap. And then the next sentence is, I couldn't scrap. So he got the shit kicked out of him. And he was like, I'm done trying to fight railroad workers.
A little bit too tough for me.
Yeah. So he goes and robs somebody. He gets a couple bucks, right? He goes and buys a revolver. He gets a nice hat, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he tries his hand at going to the red light district in Denver, which turns out to be a huge mistake. Mm-hmm. So he gets too drunk, as we all do, in the red light district, and he wakes up with very little recollection of what happens, right? But he doesn't have anything. He's all out of money. He lost his gun. He lost his hat. So
he explains the knots on his head too.
Yeah. He's all beat up and everything. His freaking jaws sore. Like, what the hell happened? Anyways, that kind of was, I'd say, a little bit of a turning point for him. He was like, all right, I'm done trying to chase after ladies, right?
Yeah.
It's what the red light district is. Just for anybody that doesn't know, red light district is like a big, prostitution section of town that they all kind of congregate. So he's like, I'm done chasing ladies. I'm just going to focus on boys.
Oh yeah. He also blames the STD on them, right? He was like, oh, I got gonorrhea from them, like that's exactly it. It was like, dude, everything you blame on why, again, never fully admitting to his homosexuality. It was always like, no, it's, I don't like ladies because they're usually surrounded by men that, can beat the crap out of me if they don't like the acts that I'm performing on them. Or like, it's like, and then he, wraps that whole, my last attempt with women is because, hey, they're the only ones that, left me, something to remember them
Yeah.
by, which was gonorrhea. And it's like, yeah, of course. Yeah. That's your excuse why you can't explain yourself. Yeah.
Sure, Carl.
Sure. Yeah. Sure, Carl. Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, so I mean, from that point on, essentially his sexual preference
Yeah.
kind of leaned towards really
Sadly.
really young boys,
Yeah.
I would say between the ages of like 8 and maybe 20,
Yeah.
right? That's where he leans, and it's almost never consensual.
Yeah.
Right. So that red light incident happened. He leaves Denver. He goes to Missouri, and this is one of those portions of the book where he kind of just glosses over a whole lot of travel. I mean, I feel like he hits cities on maybe a weekly basis, sometimes monthly basis. He'll hang out just long enough to maybe get a job and then lose that job for fighting or stealing, and then he'll just move on to the next place, right? And when you're stealing stuff, I guess it's a quick buck, right?
Yeah.
So like you steal something, you sell it, and then you get your plane ticket. And I mean, that whole thing is probably only takes him about 6 hours to decide that he wants to leave versus, to when he's actually leaving.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes to Missouri. He actually works at a in a carnival or a circus for a little while, right? So it's this Wild West show that a circus puts on. Doesn't fit in, obviously. He's too hardened, too steeled at this point, too jaded, and again, as always, doing his Carl Panzram thing. So he starts fighting people and stealing stuff, and he gets kicked out of there. He goes to St. Louis to work the railroads again, obviously probably trying not to fight railroad workers as much. And then along the way, so he goes to Chicago first, and I think in Chicago, again, it's not super clear, so we're kind of maybe drawing a couple conclusions here. But from Chicago, he kind of catches wind that, hey, maybe churches are a good place to steal money from, right? Because people are always giving money to God, and so he starts stealing from churches, and makes his way all the way down to Texas. And then he thinks, hey, you know what? Maybe Mexico has got some. I heard from a guy over here,
out there,
over yonder. Yeah, Mexico has got churches that have a bunch of money and jewels and all this stuff. Of course, no. So he crosses the border into Mexico. He figures out quickly that there's not as much money, or the same amount, or like I said, even less in churches in Mexico. So he hangs out there. He finds some outlaws that are hanging out in Mexico. He tries to join the Mexican army. I mean, this guy's got like a lot of dad lore. I'm not gonna lie. But he tries to join the Mexican army. He realized he actually, like, almost verbatim says he doesn't like their beans that they eat, and he doesn't like the peppers that they eat them with. So that's the reason he's like, nah, I don't like this whole Mexico thing. So
Mexican diet is what stopped Carl Panzram from committing rape and sodomy and the atrocities down there. Crazy. Yeah.
Yep. So as he's crossing the border from Mexico back into Texas, another kind of like interesting sort of saga of his life. He like steals a horse and then rides his horse to death. Yeah. His horse dies. He's in the middle of the desert, and then he continues on foot. And he said he damn near walked himself to death before he finally got to, some civilization or establishment or something like that, where he could find some support for himself. But yeah, so Texas is also, it's hard to tell from the way that he tells his story, but Texas is likely the place that he committed his first murder. At least one that he admitted to. I don't think it's ever been corroborated by anybody, but he did admit to this murder. He and another, I don't know, bandolero or some person that he met along the way, they kind of like teamed up, partnered up. They found this little kind of Indian boy, right? Mexican, maybe. Yeah. I don't know. It was like Native Mexican or something.
Yeah, it was the Indian boy and him. It actually like convinced this 35-year-old is what it was, like, who was like completely innocent, like first time on the rails is what it was. So it was him and the Indian boy, actually like prey on this guy, right? Like, in fact, he makes that famous quote, right? Like, he tells Lesser, it was, he could tell that the Indian boy felt the same of like, hey, the weak, the harmless, the unsuspecting. That's my philosophy. That's who we're going to go after. And they both basically locked eyes is the way he describes it. I mean, not in such, actual words, but they basically locked eyes and like, oh yeah, this guy's an idiot. This guy doesn't know, he's very inexperienced. And, and sadly, like, the 35-year-old's just like, trying to be nice with them, even willing to give up money. And yeah, Chris, I mean, the rest, man. It was pretty intense.
Yep. So they hold him at gunpoint. They have their way with him after beating him up a little bit so that he's not going to be resisting at all. And then they basically tie him to a tree. They tie him to a tree and they leave. And interestingly enough, they rethink it. They go back. They beat him up some more. They tie him even tighter to the tree.
Yep.
And then they leave him. And so we have to assume Carl Panzram assumes that person died.
Yep.
That guy died. So that was, I guess, technically the first murder that he's admitting to.
Yeah. Yeah. He said what, like, oh man, y'all could go check, or anybody could go check if anybody was left for if a body was left for the coyotes or the buzzards, right? I was like, dang, dude, like, no remorse, man. Committed your sodomy, raped the guy, left them tied up to a tree, just took off. Crazy.
Yeah. No, it's very, very, very little remorse, if any, throughout his entire life, with the exception of like one or two occasions. So from Texas, he goes to California, to Montana, to Oregon. Again, he's just kind of riding the rails around, seeing what's up, stealing some stuff. Well, in Oregon, I forget exactly which city, he stole some jewelry, and he's trying to sell it, and he gets pinched by the cops for trying to sell this pocket watch, or this watch, under the name of Jeff Baldwin. It was the name that he was going by at this time. Again, he had probably 10 different aliases throughout the course of his criminal career. At this point in time, he's Jeff Baldwin, right? So 1915, he's about, what would we say, 22, 23 years old, 1915. He gets pinched and he goes to Oregon State Prison, right? And by this time in his life, like you said, Octavio, the weak, the harmless, the unsuspecting, he's just full of rage. He actually makes a point of saying, I hate all of humanity. I hate all people. But by this point in time, I didn't hate myself yet. And I think that I found that kind of interesting, that he's self-aware enough to know around what time he started like self-loathing, like true self-loathing feelings, like, because that kind of goes into towards the end of his life, some of the stuff that he does in the courtroom, right? And just a spoiler alert, he gets hanged, right? But it almost seems like he wants to, right? And I think a lot of that is probably attributable to his self-loathing. And at this point in time, doesn't have it, right? He just hates everybody, and he wants to burn the entire world, right? So, so he goes to Oregon, this Oregon State Prison, which is, for him, I would almost say like another watershed moment. He spends quite a while here, but this is where I think he gets a lot of ideas about the penal structure of the United States of America and what prisons do and what they don't do. So he shows up, and this warden, right? His name is Harry Minto. And he's another hardliner. He's a very old school type guard who believes in beatings and starving people. And I mean, like, he actually lists out a number of different torture techniques that they perform on these prisoners. And they're brutal, to be quite honest. They're brutal. And I'd actually like to go through a couple of them right now. So we know what straitjackets are, right? We've seen them in the movies. It's almost always in the loony bin or psychiatric hospital. They used to use them for these prisoners as a punishment. And I don't know about you, but when I was in elementary school, I think there was like some presentation where they brought in a straitjacket, right? And they like put you in it and they kind of like buckle it up, and you're like, oh, wow, I can't move. That's not how these straitjackets worked at all.
No, I mean, Chris, I'm sure you're going to explain it, but one of the things that stood out to me, I looked it up right away, man. Like I definitely, throughout this entire autobiography, like I'm like pausing, Googling and pausing ChatGPT, and I'm like, what's validity of like some of these things, but more importantly, it's like, man, where's this at now in time and space? Like, are we still doing these type of punishments? Because I think one of the first ones, like as soon as I saw the straitjacket, I'm like, are we still doing that, man? Is that still common? Like, so yeah, I ended up looking. It's not. It's common and actually very rare to use them in mental institutions or prisons, anymore. But I know you're going to go into that on the why, probably because of how what it actually, what the effects, but also some of the other tortures, right? Like this probably got categorized with everything out there, where it's not humane, it's not the right thing to do, right? So yeah, tell me, like, straight jacket,
Yeah.
everything else. What were some of the punishments that were kind of going on in those days?
Yeah, so the straitjacket, it honestly, it seems particularly brutal. I mean, they all do, to be honest, but the
Yeah.
straitjacket is more of like a time sort of punishment.
Yeah.
So they put you in a straitjacket, and I guess it's kind of, you're in the same position as a normal straitjacket, but they cinch the shit out of it. I mean, they got like guys on either, like guards on either side that's cinching it as hard as they possibly can. And what it does is it cuts off your blood flow, I guess, to your like entire body, really. And they leave you there for like 12 hours, which is long enough to create some neurological issues, right? So they leave him there for 12 hours. I don't know how many times this happened to Carl Panzram, but enough for him to actually write about it at the end of his life. So he definitely remembered it. But yeah, he said he couldn't walk for days after, and he didn't feel quite right for weeks.
Yeah,
For
the
weeks
numbness,
after.
right? The effects.
Numbness.
Dude,
Yeah.
crazy, man, crazy.
Yep.
And then
So
we wonder
they
why it's
like,
probably not that common today. Like that's insane, man.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
not great for you. It's not super healthy. The next one he describes is called the snorting pole,
Dude.
and basically what that is, there's like a really long, like an 8 or 9 foot pole, and there's like a pair of handcuffs at the top that's attached to a rope and a pulley, and they'll handcuff these prisoners, and then they'll pull their hands all the way up as much as possible. There's a guard on the other side that's kind of yanking on it too, so it doesn't feel great on your hands. And then another guard comes in with a whip, like just a straight up whip, and just whips the shit out of them. He said 15 to 20 lashes per, and the noises that the prisoners would make kind of resembled snorting, so that's why they call it the snorting pole. The dose of salts, right, which is where, and this one actually involved other prisoners too, which is kind of a little bit fucked up, right? So when they're on their work detail or whatever, a guard would just like, somebody acts up, a guard would point to him.
Yep.
A bunch of other prisoners, right, and he said, Carl said, no prisoner would ever hesitate. They would grab this prisoner that the guard pointed to, throw him on the ground, pull up his shirt and pull his pants down, and the guard would just basically go to town, beating the fuck out of this guy. And they said it was the best cure for constipation. I guess a lot of the prisoners would shit
because
themselves.
before sodomy with the basically with the the stick that they had, like
they would actually. I didn't know.
Okay.
Okay.
Because he said something about like like I remember catching, it was like it was the number 4 stick or something that they had on their saddle, and that's why like it was like no one was constipated after that. It was like, dude, what the heck? So I had to go back and reread that. I was like, where did I miss something? It was like, oh, I missed the part that it was like, no, the guards would even use that and perform sodomy on them, man. Dude, that was intense, man. But I know the next one was like you're talking about the bat or the battle, man. That was pretty nuts.
I wasn't 100% sure. I guess I didn't get the full gist of it. What was the bat or the paddle?
Yeah, so I think it was like, if I'm not mistaken, it was not only a series of beatings that they did like over time, but it was more of the deprivation. It was like slowly, it was almost like experimentation, right? So same type of paddle that they did at the Minnesota State, training school, same concept, right? They basically had these holes in the paddle that would allow them to, as you've probably heard, less, air resistance, so a stronger hit. They would continue to paddle for long and extensive periods. But But the thing is that they would do it consistently for like 10 to 50 days and slowly also deprive you of food. So now it's like you're uncomfortable, you can't sleep, you're continuously in pain, you can't sit, because, like that's where they did all the majority of the abuse. Oh, in addition to that, they're slowly giving you food deprivation. So I think you're kind of getting it all, it's like you're getting sleep deprivation from pain. You're also getting food deprivation. So it's like, dude, it's just another experimentation of torture that they were committing at the time.
Okay. So the food deprivation, you can't, your body can't heal at all.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Another one was called the restraint machine. Don't get your hopes up. There's no machine involved. Prisoner would just stand with their back to a door, and they would be handcuffed to a door, talking like a prison door with like bars, right? And then they would come from the other side, and they would throw a belt under their armpits and hoist them up onto this door and cinch the belt. And so they would basically be like kind of stuck with their feet off the ground on a door, being held up by their armpits with a belt, and they would leave them there for 5 to 14 days straight. And obviously that's going to cause some neurological issues. It's going to cause some breathing issue. I mean, it's just straight torture. It's straight torture. Make no mistake.
Yeah.
And this happened in American prisons. I mean, I still am kind of like shocked. I've read this like a couple times now, and I'm still shocked that this ever happened. And again, the food, they would restrict their food to just bread and water, which is nothing nutritionally speaking.
Yeah, Chris, on the restraint machine, I actually looked this up. So similar tortures, and I was correct when I remember sending you a message about this. Like, dude, me and my wife went to the Auschwitz camp. Of course, completely morbid. Definitely in a time where like the weather was in extreme conditions. In fact, it resembled something close to the same time frame. In the 40s.
Oh, it was wintertime.
Yeah, wintertime, extreme weather conditions. And I will tell you, I remember vividly, there was this one section where they talked about very similar torture, right? They kind of would hold prisoners up, to a very tight position, or throw their arms behind their back, and like essentially like, and they talked about the restraint machine in certain forms of punishment. They would almost do the exact same thing, put their arms completely elevated behind their back, where their arms would essentially pop out of their sockets after just being up there and hanged for hours, right? Or the other restraint machine that I saw, there was another example, and I don't think Carl Panzram talked about this one, but it was known as the restraint machine, or a form of torture where, and again, I saw this in the Nazi, concentration camps, where basically they would hold them up completely and put people in bricks, around their body, and it's just holding them up completely. And as you pointed, right, it would like constrict them more and more and more, to the point where that pressure, would eventually kill them. So pretty intense to hear the restraint machine in American prisons pre the war was, probably early things that got carried over, across, sadly into Europe.
Yeah. And there was a point in time a little bit later in Panzram's life where he went to visit, it was a museum. But it was about the Spanish Inquisition, and he was looking at a wall of torture, and it was kind of, I guess, reflecting on his own experiences versus the Spanish Inquisition, right? Obviously, the Spanish Inquisition forms of torture a lot of times ended in death, and I think Carl was thinking that maybe might have been a little bit desirable, right? Versus all the stuff that he had been through at that point in time in his life. But let's chug right along and get through the rest of these tortures. Then the next one he listed was called the hummingbird, which is where they would lay a prisoner basically on all fours or face down into a bathtub with maybe like a inch or two of freezing cold water, by the way. And they would take a sponge on a stick that's connected to a car battery, right? And they would run it up and down their feet, their legs, their bare back and everything. And he said that was particularly brutal and unpleasant. And then, also one of the biggest reasons why they use these hummingbirds was because it didn't leave any marks on the body.
Yeah.
Maybe some light burns here and there, but nothing like like the paint shop, right? Like from his youth, where they would, and that's the reason why they call it the paint shop, right? They come out all black and blue. Their bodies were painted with bruises. And the hummingbird was something that could deliver just as much displeasure, but with none of the outward marks and bruises and stuff. And then lastly, one thing he talks about, I think that it kind of seemed like this one was his least favorite.
Yeah.
Which was hosing, right? And we all know what hosing is. You just take a fire hose and you blast a person with it. And it breaks bones, and makes it hard to breathe. And obviously hypothermia is involved, right? So that was the other one that he
the hypothermia
highlighted.
I think it was because they they would put the prisoners, like after like 5, 10, 12 minutes or something like that. He mentioned like they immediately sent them back to their cell block, like put them on the cold concrete floor, sitting there for an hour. It's like just laying down in their wet clothing, man. It's like, dude, that
soaking wet.
That probably, I don't know, man. You go through the list, dude. It's like pick your poison.
In the Pacific Northwest too. Yep. You're talking Pacific Northwest in wintertime, pretty fucking cold. Pretty gosh dang cold. So yeah, you're blasting somebody with a fire hose for, they said 5 to 12 minutes, right? So could you imagine getting blasted with a fire hose for a solid 10 minutes and then just getting thrown back in your cell soaking wet?
Yeah. No, I'm definitely, man. I would be the easiest prisoner there, man. Like, dude, I'm not touching any of these tortures, man. Like, come on, man. That's insane. That's insane, man. That's insane.
Yep. So all this stuff was under that initial warden that when he got there, Harry Minto. There's kind of an interesting little chronicle that happens. He befriends a young man. I forget what his name is. He's about 20 years old. Anyways, Panzram by this point in time is pretty good at escaping prisons. However, the guards at this prison, since he's tried to escape so many times, they keep a very, very close eye on him. And he just wanted to make life hard for the guards. So he befriends this young man, again, 20 years old, and he tells him exactly what to do. He says, go, work this certain job, or go request this certain job. And then I think he ended up in the nighttime, he ended up escaping because he had access to a certain area of the prison. Anyway, this kid, he ends up escaping, right, under the, I guess, guidance or tutelage of Panzram, and he gets away. And so it's like a big deal. So there's a bunch of guards out there that are looking for this kid, and Harry Minto himself, the warden himself, goes out and looks for this kid. Well, while he was away, while the kid was running, he picked up somehow or other, he had gained the possession of a revolver, and it all kind of ended in a standoff between him and a couple of the guards. The young man fired, emptied the chamber, the magazine, whatever, killed Harry Minto, right, the warden of this prison, right, and that kind of shocked the town, shocked the area around it. And so I think the governor is the one appointing wardens at this time. The governor appointed Harry Minto's brother. Yeah. Harry Minto's brother was appointed as the new warden for this place, and as you can imagine, he came in with a vengeance.
Oh, I bet, man.
It was all the same torture methods and all the same rules, but even worse, even more draconian, right? So that they one of the things they brought back was called the bull ring. I don't even know if I guess it's torture, kind of like mental torture, but basically they took all the worst prisoners, all their problem children, and they had them walk around like this 1/4-mile track. But the thing is, they had guards, like a lot of guards, watching them, and there were very, very strict rules. If you walk too fast, if you walk too slow, if you look around anywhere other than your feet, if you talk at all, if it looks like you're if it even looks like you're planning something, you're warned to be shot. You're warned to be shot and killed on the spot, and those guards had shoot to kill orders. So it got even worse. It got to the point where the governor of Oregon kind of caught wind of this stuff. He sent a commission into this prison to watch how the guards were treating the prisoners, and obviously they came up with like, holy shit, they're torturing these people.
Yeah.
And the governor he talked to Harry Minto's brother, which his name is John Minto. Is it John Minto? What the fuck was his name?
Yeah, no, yeah,
John
Minto.
Minto. Yeah,
Yep.
John Minto was his name. Talked to him. John Minto resigns, and this new warden comes in. And this is where I said earlier, this is a little bit of kind of a turning point for Panzram, right? So this new guy that comes in, his name is what's his name, Octavio?
Charles. Oh, that's right.
Is it Charles? Charles A. Murphy. Charles A. Murphy was this guy's name.
How should we not know the former Army captain? Yeah,
right. But yeah, so it's this former Army captain, right? Charles A. Murphy that comes in, and he quickly becomes known as Spud Murphy. And the way that he got his nickname was he reinstated a lot of the leniencies, a lot of the kind of normalcy to these prisoners' lives. Under his philosophy of, I guess, a little bit of kindness and respect and rehabilitation, more so than draconian laws and rules trying to just beat down these prisoners so that they don't do anything and they don't get any ideas. And he was a bit of a pioneer. And Octavio, I know you did a little bit of extra research on this guy. He was a pioneer in penology. And again, his idea was, hey, I want to rehabilitate these guys. I want to make it so that these prisoners can actually at some point successfully go back and reintegrate into society, and be, at very least standard citizens, right? If not model or standout citizens, and contribute something back. Is that kind of what you got?
That's exactly it. In fact, there's a lot of times where basically a lot of the different penologists or sociologists, psychologists, that actually really studied reformation in the early days. They talk about, Spud Murphy, right? And again, going back to, I think, the name Spud Murphy, why'd they give him that name, right? It's like, hey, his worst punishment at the time was giving people extra, KP duty, right? Going to the kitchen to literally peel more potatoes. That was your worst punishment. I mean, I think you can say that. I walked away with like, man, this guy's like, I'm gonna kill you with kindness, right? And I think, obviously, Carl Panzram talks about, just some of the ways he actually did that, right? Which I know, you mentioned right away. It's like, hey, it was all about reformation. But yeah, Chris, I think you should cover that, right? Like, what are some of the things that right away it was like, dude, it was alarming, and Carl and some of these other like crazy ass prisoners, really thought like, there's no way this guy is going to be successful, right? But
so some of the, like, another thing that he did almost immediately. Well, so one of the first things he did was I think he wanted to talk to all of his like worst prisoners, and so obviously Panzram was one of them. He came in and he talked to Spud. I keep wanting to call him Spud McKenzie, dude. It's Spud Murphy. Spud Murphy. Yeah, Spud Murphy. And Murphy's like, he's telling Panzram all about his philosophy and all this stuff, and Panzram, he's like, yeah, whatever, sounds good. He said a lot of the stuff that he was saying, I'm too dumb to understand. I mean, he sounds like he's talking all this smart shit and like, I don't know, whatever. Initially, he thought he was an idiot, and then he thought he was an idiot again, and then he thought he might be like a little gay.
Yeah.
For some reason, which is so funny coming from Panzram, dude.
Yeah.
He's probably gay, like, bro.
Yeah.
Carl's coming from inside the house, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, and he was very, very taken aback by this guy's approach to being a warden. Another thing he did is he got rid of the bull ring.
Yep.
Got rid of the bull ring, and immediately, and he started building more cells because he wanted to give some of the better prisoners the opportunity to have your own space, right?
Oh, that is right. He did. Yeah, he took away the concept of like two to a cell. It's like, hey, as they start reforming, basically privileges, right? A metric system or a privilege system. I was like, yeah, man, that wasn't a thing. It was the opposite. It was always punishment system. Is how do we give more a negative outlook? It's like, man, are we doing a color system here? It's always, how do I get back up to a green? It's like, no, man, you start at green, you're always going to be a green. We're trying to get you to the next color, trying to get you to the next, better, better privilege that we can give you, So.
Yeah, a little bit more reformed. Yeah. Another thing that he did, he added like an education corner to the prison so that prisoners could go and read books and do some studies and stuff like that.
That's right.
Again, getting after that kind of reformation thing. But the craziest thing that he did, which
Yeah.
which I mean, ended up not being a good idea. Um, uh, he brought Panzram into his office one day, and he says, Carl Panzram, I don't think you're a bad person. And Panzram's obviously like, I don't really care what you think, man. Like, what, I am a bad person. Like, fuck you. I
Yeah.
don't like you. And he goes, you know what? I even trust you. Panzram goes, that's probably a mistake. And he goes, if I let you out, if I let you out of the gates right now, it's morning time, right? If I let you out of the gates, will you be back by supper time? And Panzram just goes, what? What? And he writes in his book, he's like, I would have been an idiot to say no. So he says yes. And you know what? Spud Murphy, he holds up his end of the deal. The front gate's open. Panzram walks out of the gate, turns around, and he's so surprised he has no idea what to do. He sits down on a rock and he spends he said he spent like 12 hours pacing and just thinking about, why would this guy do something like that? And come supper time, he walked right back in through those gates. Yep.
Yeah. He
And
thought he was
he goes
crazy,
up to,
right? All the prisoners
yeah,
thought he was crazy. Yeah.
all the prisoners thought he was crazy, and Frank, he was like, I have no idea. So confronted with somebody that trusts him and somebody that's kind with him, he is completely taken aback. And I think this really goes to show he's just never ever had any compassion shown to him.
That's right.
He's never had anybody be nice to him.
Yeah.
No compassion, no companionship, no love, no nothing. And he finally gets it, and it floors him, right? Which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
And so anyways, this kind of becomes like a regular thing, and I think it became a regular thing for multiple prisoners, is kind of what I was getting. It might have just been him. And Panzram only really writes about himself, but I think it was part of Murphy's program. Anyways, on a regular basis, probably not daily, maybe weekly or monthly or as needed, these guys would just get to go into the city, right, and have a good time. And at one point, of course, Panzram has to ruin it. Because it ruins everything.
Yeah.
he goes and gets drunk, and while he's drunk, he's like, fuck this, and he gets on a train and skips town, and come supper time, as per their deal, Spud Murphy's waiting for him, and no Panzram, right? So they have to go out and start a manhunt for this guy. He ended up going and burglarizing somebody and beating somebody up, and they go catch him, right? Because I don't know, he's probably drunk or hungover or whatever. They catch him. He wasn't that far away, and as they're bringing him back, I think this is maybe one of the first times that Panzram
remorse, right?
is expressing deep remorse.
That's
he was
crazy.
like, I would rather be dead than face Spud Murphy, right?
Yeah.
This is the only guy that's ever shown me even a slight amount of reprieve.
Yep.
I have to go face him now and tell him that I'm a fucking jackass. I fucked up. You can't trust me anymore. I took advantage of you. Yeah. And so this is, I think this is one of the first time that he actually feels remorse. So in this, we get to see that kind of the human side, right? It's like, oh, he is a human, right? He is a human. He has the capacity, as much as he likes to say he doesn't, he has the capacity to feel human emotions.
Yeah.
As much as he likes to, kind of like shove that down into the deepest parts of him, like, I don't have any capacity for emotions other than hate. Hey, dude, guy, come on, you're human. You're just like the rest of us. And this is actually the point of the book where I started feeling like, oh, he's just like he's not like he is, but he's not just a serial killer. He's not just a criminal, right? He's a human. He's got feelings. So anyways, he goes back, he faces Spud Murphy. Spud Murphy, hangs him up. He goes, old school on him, hangs him up for 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever, by the hands. And, Panzram doesn't hold that against him, obviously, because he knows he deserves it. But unfortunately, things kind of start to go downhill for Murphy. A lot of his efforts are, they're kind of like petering off a little bit. And a lot of that is attributable to Panzram, because he's kind of he's sort of the lifeblood of the us versus them mentality of the prisoners. And, he tried to escape and he took advantage of the warden. And it's like, a lot of the other prisoners kind of caught wind of oh yeah, we're prisoners. They're guards. Yeah, I forgot. And so the tensions keep rising, and ultimately Panzram is like, I gotta hop this joint. So he escapes, right? And he still owes, to this day, still owes 14.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I don't know. Actually, he's dead. I don't know. Maybe he does know 14 years. I don't know if that's gets scrubbed off of his record, but he escapes from Oregon State Prison. He said, I made a clean break. I've never been back since. I still owe 14 years there.
Yeah, crazy.
And so that leads into, yeah. And so again, I think this might be the point where he starts his self-loathing.
Yeah.
Right? Because he took advantage of the only person that ever showed him kindness. We know that prior to this, he said, I didn't hate myself. I think this is probably the point in time where he starts hating himself too. When he goes on this killing spree and he just gives in to all of his, worst. It's not just a killing spree, by the way. It's a killing spree, burglary spree, rape spree, and arson. Yeah, arson spree. So again, the way that he writes this is very matter of fact, and he glosses over a lot of the different details, but I'm going to do the best. I wrote some notes down. I'm going to do the best that I can. So he starts off in Oregon. He registers for the draft in World War I. Again, this is, about the time that the war is brewing and going on in Europe. I don't know how he registered. Oh, he registered under a different
That's
name.
right. Yeah, he's probably on his 15th alias at this point. That's right, because he couldn't do it off of his Oregon name or something. Yeah, it's like crazy, man.
Yeah, so he just shows up, and again, it's wartime, and they probably don't give a fuck anyway.
Yeah.
He's just like, I'm Billy Bo Johnson, and they register him, and then he like really quickly, he's like, wait,
this isn't
what am
for
I
me.
doing?
This isn't for me.
Wait, I did this already.
Yeah, not gonna work out.
Yep. So he just fucking walks away.
Yep.
He walks away from. I don't know why I find that so funny. He just walks away from that, and he goes to Baltimore somehow and commits a burglary there. And I think with the money from that, he goes to New York, and he said it's to see the lights or see what made the lights bright. So I don't know. He's just I don't know. He's just fuck it. Like, might as well go to New York. Never been there. From there, he hops on a ship that goes to Panama. From Panama, he works his way down to Peru, where he spends a little bit of time working in some copper mines. From there, he got fired probably, or just left. He goes to Chile, and then back to Panama. And then from Panama, he goes to this isolated island off the coast of Panama.
Oh yeah, that was interesting. Yeah.
Called I forget what the island's called, but he actually references it again when he's writing out his autobiography. But it's like this desolate island, and there's only a couple of like uncontacted tribes. There are like relatively uncontacted tribes there, and I think he's pretty fascinated by the fact that they haven't been spoiled by a lot of the Western
not civilized,
ideology.
Right? Yeah, that was a big thing.
Not civilized, and what that means is, it's not like that Western ideology.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder how he would feel if he went to an area that wasn't, Westernized.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess he kind of did. He went to Africa, right? He went to South America or Central America. But yeah, anyway, so he goes to this isolated island. He's working for this Sinclair oil company. And I think he didn't like his boss or something like that. And the Sinclair comes up again, by the way. He didn't like his boss, so he burns an oil rig. He just burns it down. He loves burning stuff. And then he flees from there. He goes back to Panama, and he goes to the Darien country, right? So south of Panama is, as we know, the Darien Gap, which is this notoriously hard to traverse and unforgiving jungle environment. It is inhabited by some people, and again, he goes to this area and he hangs out with the native folks. They're again uncivilized, and I think that kind of contributes more to his fascination with people that are not civilized or are not inundated with Western ideology. So yeah, he hangs out. He just hangs out with them, I guess, and then he gets on a Panamanian. Links up with a Panamanian sailor to kill and rob people on a boat. That is just another chapter in his book. He joined an oil tanker, and then from there he went to New York, and then to Texas, and then to Scotland, where he robbed a ship in Scotland. And then
Yeah.
this guy did it all.
Yeah,
He
late
really did.
20s, right? I think we read somewhere at this time he had already hit like in his late 20s, or like he was by 30 or something. It was like by 30 he had already seen 31 countries. It's like, dude, this guy, like, what, man? It must have been great to be in those times, man. To just travel so freely, go wherever the heck you want. But I don't know,
Yeah.
like, yeah,
I
picking
mean,
up
the crazy
passports and
part
aliases along the way.
the crazy part is that the world is so much more easily accessible today than it was in
Yeah,
the 30s. There's no airplanes. The guy's just hopping on ships. He's stowing
going,
away every now
yeah,
and then. Like if he doesn't have any money, he'll just fucking get on a ship
yeah,
and hide in a cargo hold, and then he'll get
steal
off
chips or
wherever
something. Yeah, yeah, dude. Yeah,
like, dude, I feel like at some points he's just like, he's because he did stow away a couple of times.
yeah.
He'll get in a hold, he'll stay there. Next port, he's like,
Yeah.
where the fuck am I? I don't know, but it's land and I'm getting
Yeah,
off.
and picking up a
Like,
passport, right? Like right after, he went from to Scotland. It was like, yeah, he robbed a ship. Then he found himself like, I mean, he skips to, I'm in Panama now with my Panamanian passport and heading back to London. It's like, dude, what? It's like,
yeah,
how'd you get there? What are you doing there? Like, and then he's like, hey, if you don't, and then every segment along the way, it's like, oh, if you don't believe me, here's who can corroborate it, or here's what I did, or here, yeah, they're still
yeah,
looking for that guy who burned down that building and caused $100,000 worth of damages. Like, dude, who are you, man?
yeah,
Yeah,
man, yeah. So this is so he like quadruples his dad lore here, right? And like you
yeah.
said,
Oh
so
yeah,
okay, so he's got his old Panama passport. He goes to London. He crosses the channel. He crosses the English Channel, goes to France, where he joins another ship, and he hits a few other ports in Europe, and then comes back to the States in Connecticut. And he doesn't
yeah,
slow down, man. He just doesn't stop. Right. By the way, this is the longest. This is the longest period of time in his life, from the
yeah.
time that he was 11 years old, where he was a free man,
Oh
aside from
yeah,
a couple days in like local jail here and there.
yeah,
But this is what he does with his free time. So he's in Connecticut, right? And he goes to this house, and he doesn't say that he knows whose house this is, but he goes in and he robs $40,000 worth of jewelry and bonds from none other than the former president William Howard Taft.
Chris, I don't buy it one bit, man. This guy,
You
like,
think he knew?
yeah, I'm thinking like if this guy was peeing in people's soups at 11, masturbating in people's ice creams. This guy was vengeful from the beginning, man. There's no way he was like, man, who was the Secretary of War that sent me, kept me in Fort Leavenworth all that time? Yeah, time to go get his money, man. There's no way. Like, out of all the houses in Connecticut, he just happened to rob, you know, Secretary of War that pinched you, and then now he's like, future president of the United
Former,
States, yeah, or former president of the
yeah,
United States, yeah, it's
yeah.
crazy.
So, so yeah, he does this. He gets jewelry. He gets bonds. He gets, I think, he gets a pistol from his house
Oh,
too.
that's right,
Yeah,
yeah, that's
and
right.
I
There you
think he
go.
tried to hang on to that pistol as long as he could,
Yeah,
but he eventually lost it. Right. So he takes the stuff that he stole. He sells it off. So he's probably got a little bit less than $40,000. Either way, that's a lot. That's a lot of money back in the 30s or the 20s.
yeah,
So he's got all this money, and he's got this bright idea to. And this is where his body count went up a lot too. But
yeah,
he's got this bright idea to buy a yacht for the sole purpose of robbing other ships, robbing other yachts. So he had a little pirate
yeah,
chronicle too, which is, I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of cool.
yeah,
If you're gonna be a criminal, you might as well go be a pirate. Anyways, the first thing that he thinks when he buys this yacht is, I'm gonna go hire some sailors,
yeah,
or lure some sailors onto my boat, take them out, rob them blind, rape them, and then kill them. And he did this, and then it tie a rock to their bodies and throw them in the ocean. And he did this to 10 different sailors. I don't know how many he did at a time. I don't know if it was one at a time or two at a time or
yeah.
whatever.
It sounded like it was like smaller groups. He definitely picked. He definitely mentioned like he was pretty predatory, and descriptive on like how he would pursue his prey. He hinted at like, oh man, it was something like to the effect of like, if they were good looking, could tell they had money, he would kind of group them, but yeah, no, I mean, it could be one, it would be sometimes grouping. I do know what I thought was like rather interesting was like, all right, he this guy was smart enough to understand when he was probably getting caught. Again, escape artist as well, probably something he didn't add to his list of skills as a serial killer. But the reality is like he's an escape artist, so he's starting to continuously look over his shoulder. But I remember like, all right, I've killed about 10 sailors. People are starting to realize I'm bringing my boat back with no one back on there, right? So.
Yeah.
I want to say he did that like successfully before like crashing his yacht, but I know that had like a crazy story, but pretty
So yeah.
intense, man.
So he doesn't he doesn't say anything about how he crashed his yacht. But my guess is alcohol was involved.
Yeah, yeah,
So he's like, I don't know, boating around doing Panzram things,
yeah.
right? And he's probably drunk, and he crashed his yacht. And I guess he swam back to shore. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't too far. Anyways, his yacht's at the bottom. Well, not his yacht. Actually, no. He did buy a yacht. He
Yeah,
bought it.
this
He
one
didn't
he
steal it.
bought. Yeah,
Yeah. So it's an honest yacht, right? So anyways, it's at the bottom of the ocean now. He swims back to shore. He's like, yeah, they kind of know me now. Like, it's best if I skip town. So he goes on his second world tour.
yeah,
He hops on a ship. He goes to Europe first, and then he goes down to Africa. He goes to the Congo. He works for the Sinclair Oil Company again, which is kind of strange that he burned one of their oil rigs in Central America, and then he's in a different continent. So
I
he
don't,
pressed reset.
I don't mention it, but like because I think it's actually it's something it's done in one of his letters, but I guess I'll hint it now. He does mention about cooperation. It's like, hey, if you really want to know, it's like, because again, he's going by different aliases. He's telling the guard, it was like, hey, when you see next time you see Mr. Sinclair, the oil tycoon, let him know if he remembers X individual, whatever alias he was carrying at the time. And he was like, yeah, ask him if he remembers someone burning down his like oil rig and stuff. And it's like, yeah, there's clear example of this guy. It's like, yeah, if he's still looking for me, tell him I'm sorry. It's like, man,
Yeah,
dude's asking for
yeah,
forgiveness.
and the way that this guy writes, man, like, again, like I said, it's so matter of fact, and he says so
Yeah.
many times, like, this is my story. Don't care if you believe it or not. Do whatever you want with it. I just
Yeah.
got to get it off my chest. So, like, to me, I don't know, and he doesn't seem like a sensationalist in any way,
No.
shape, or form. Like I said, he's a very like a reserved person. He just doesn't seem like the type to want to lie about stuff
Yeah.
or make himself
Yeah.
sound
Yeah.
worse than he is. He knows how bad he is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Never
pretty
shying away
evident,
from
and
it. Yeah.
yeah, not shying away with it, not blowing smoke up people's ass about it. But yeah, so I don't think he's lying about
Yeah.
like any of this stuff, to be honest with you, man.
Yeah. Well, the killing
Anyways,
spree continues, right? Yeah.
yeah. So yep, it gets worse.
Yeah.
He went to the Congo again. He worked for the Sinclair Oil Company. Okay, and then I think it was either in the Congo or Angola, because he was in Angola as well. He tries to buy some little like local
Mhm.
girl to,
Yeah.
obviously, you fill in the blank. He bought one, returned her when he said he found out that she wasn't a virgin.
Yeah.
Returned her to the family. The family traded her for another girl, even younger,
Yeah. Sad, dude.
who he also found out wasn't a virgin. I don't know how he's finding this out. Like, I don't know. Regardless, he returns the native girl to the family and said, "Okay, I'm really now gonna only stick with young boys." And so he finds a young boy, 11, 12-year-old boy, sodomizes him, kills him, smashes his head with a rock. He said he's in like some pit somewhere, and again, this is another example. He's like, you go there today, right now. He's still there. So yeah, again, just brutal, horrible stuff. And then he goes to Angola, right, and he chronicles this time where he hires a canoe to get him across a river, or they're going fishing or something like that.
Yeah. Some weird story. Yeah.
I don't know how he got on a canoe with 6 other locals, and then he just pulls out his Luger, right, that he got from, I think this is the one that he got from William Howard Taft's house. Pulls out his Luger, shoots all 6 of them, and then dumps him overboard to feed to the alligators. And again, corroborating his story, he's like, you go find, like, those bullets are still lodged in that wood today. So I'm not lying about it, but obviously there's no evidence left because he fed everything to the crocodiles.
Yeah.
Got bored of Angola, I guess. He stowed away on a U.S. ship to Portugal. From Portugal, he stowed away on an English ship back to New York. And then at this point in time in New York, it's, I don't know, some small town in New York. He tries to steal a boat. Travels around, right, goes to a couple of different cities, comes back to Massachusetts, where he again tries to have his way with a young boy who he beat up.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Right, he finds another young boy, a little bit older. His name is George. Right, George is kind of important. Right, he's 15 years old. He finds him in New York, and he calls it the fine art of sodomy. Now, this is like his term for rape. He calls it the fine art of sodomy. Anyways, George is cool with it. But I guess, or at least that's how Panzram puts it. He already knows it. He's cool with it. Fine. So he keeps George around, and so they're sailing around. It's so ironic. But some guy tries to stick him up for his boat.
That's right.
Right. So I think it's a guy that says he's trying to sell the boat that he stole. A guy comes to him and says, I want to buy your boat. They go out, he takes the boat out, he's showing him around, whatever. And the guy tries to stick up Panzram, but Panzram, he got the drop on him. He's like, this guy's acting weird. So he tries to stick him up. Panzram just pulls out his pistol, puts 3 in his skull, and that's that. He throws the body overboard. Yeah. They go back to dock, and George freaks, right? He's scared. Obviously, he just witnessed a murder. So George runs away. He goes and tells the cops about what he saw. And Panzram's like, shit. So, like, he's got to sail somewhere else. Eventually, the cops find him in, I think, Nyack, New York, maybe. This is another interesting. So, see, he's not stupid. This guy's not stupid. So he gets pinched, right? He gets pinched for this, and he finds a lawyer, and he says, "Hey, lawyer, I can't pay. I don't have cash to pay you, but I've got a boat. So if you represent me in court and you get me out, I'll give you my boat."
Yeah.
And the lawyer's like, yeah, of course. I guess it's a nice boat, whatever. Nice enough to take this case anyway. Lawyer gets him out, right? Panzram's like, here you go. Here's the boat. Gives him the papers. Lawyer goes to register the boat, and it gets taken away because it's a stolen boat. So
yeah, I remember the previous owner literally came to claim it. It's like
yeah, and Panzram's halfway across the country by this point. So,
lawyers without a boat or money, and just got a serial killer on the loose. It's crazy, man. Crazy.
Yeah. So this guy's not stupid. He's well versed in the ways of the crook. Anyways, from there he goes to New Haven, Connecticut. Another rape, another young boy dead. Right. He gets on another ship that's supposed to go to China, but he robs an office in New York before the ship is able to leave. And he gets pinched, right? Yeah, he robs an office in New York, and he gets 5 years in Sing Sing prison, right? The super famous prison in New York. He immediately gets transferred because Sing Sing is, number one, it's overcrowding at that point in time, and number two, he's known to be like, kind of a terrible criminal, and he needs to go to the place where they send all the terrible criminals, which is Clinton Prison. In upstate New York. It's in the Adirondack Mountains in this small prison town called Dannemora. He has a pretty short stint here. He is just focused on escaping. The way he puts it, this prison's terrible. It's bleak. It's dreary. The guards suck. The food sucks. It's cold all the time. So he wants to get the fuck out of here as soon as he possibly can. One of his escape attempts, there's like a catwalk or something that he's trying to get out through the roof, right? And he ends up falling 30 feet. He breaks both. This is so crazy. He breaks both of his ankles. He breaks both of his legs. I think he breaks a couple ribs, and then he also fractures his spine.
Yeah, that's right.
And he's just like, in a heap on the ground, and guards kind of just like drag him back to his cell and throw him in his cell and give him like, I don't know what whatever the 30s equivalent of Tylenol is. So they gave him like a
No
little
medical
bit, maybe.
attention or anything, man. Yeah,
No,
it's
a
crazy.
doctor didn't even look at
Yeah,
him.
yeah,
At least that's what he's saying. Doctor
yeah,
didn't even look at him, and it took him like, I think, the better part of 2 years to actually get to a point where he can like move around again and be mobile again.
yeah.
And he actually developed a permanent limp from this. So that's as kind of like a defining feature of Carl Panzram as the book goes on. And, you know, there's other people that write about him, says, you know, oh, this big lumbering guy, and he's lumbering because he's got a limp. And then, yeah, so he spends, he spends the next 5 years in that prison. So it wasn't that short, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe short to him. But he spends the next 5 years there. And he gets out, and he's quoted, "Upon getting out, my intention was to rob, rape, and kill everybody I could, anybody and everybody." So this guy, he gets out with an absolute vengeance. And the next thing he does is he's thinking about how to kill the most humans possible.
Yep.
And it's kind of crazy because he really details out his plans to kill the most humans possible. And there's three different things that he explicitly goes over in the book. Number one is derailing a train, right? So he's like, apparently he's pretty good with explosives. He had a little bit of time in the army. He spent a lot of time talking to crooks. One of them taught him how to blast a safe open. He spent some time working for oil companies, right, in Central America and Africa. So he's picked up a lot of stuff. He wants to set an explosive on the train tracks as soon as it's going through a tunnel. And he's got some good ideas on like how to isolate this incident from support. So Octavio, I know we kind of know about like isolating an objective, right? So he's got plans to isolate this. He never actually does any of this stuff, by the way. They're all just plans. But he's like, yeah, I can kill 400 to 500 people on this train and then rob it all blind, and I can probably get like $100,000 to $400,000 out of it. So that's one of his plans. His other plan is, I must say, quite lofty. I don't know. He's so adamant that it would have worked, but I do have my doubts. He wanted to start a war.
I knew you were going, yeah.
He wanted to start a war between the U.S. And Great Britain by sinking a British ship while it was in U.S. waters. And he had a whole plan. He was like, I'm going to go up to it. I'm going to rent two small like launches, like canoes, basically. Yeah. I'm going to strap them together. I'm going to get two, barrels of gasoline. I'm going to go up and I'm going to light a fuse. And when I light the fuse, I'm going to hop in the other canoe and I'm going to canoe away as fast as possible. This is all going to be done under the cover of darkness. And it's going to sink this British ship. And, he was going to wait until the tensions are like really high. And the other thing that he did actually, and I think he actually made some moves on this part. He knew that the stock market was tied to like world events.
Yeah,
so
sure.
he like made friends with some stock trader type buddies to figure out what stocks that he needed to buy in order to like really, really capitalize monetarily on a war between the US and Great Britain. So he like really kind of thought this through a lot. I don't think it would have worked. He thinks it would have worked. I don't think so. And then the other thing that he wanted to, this guy's, that's fucking crazy, man. He's like, yeah, I could have killed a couple million people with it. Like, he just wants to watch the world burn. You know how Michael Caine in The Dark Knight Rises, he's like, so men just want to watch the world burn.
Yeah.
That's this guy.
Exactly
that's this fucking guy to a T. I swear to God. Because this next one's insane too, man. He wanted to poison a town's water supply with arsenic. He wanted to feed arsenic to a bunch of pigs. And then I don't even, he had like some weird plan. He's like, I'm going to feed these arsenic to these pigs. I'm going to put it in their trough. And then as soon as they die, I'm going to cut them open and then I'm going to bleed them and I'm going to catch all the blood. And then I'm going to skin it. And then I'm going to take the carcass and put it in the pool of blood. And I'm going to throw it in the city's water supply. I don't know why he was going to go through all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why he wanted to go through the whole pig thing, but I mean, he probably could have just did the arsenic in the water. I think that maybe would have worked, but I don't know. So yeah, to put it shortly, he wanted to kill as many people as possible and watch the world burn.
Yeah, I mean, it was nuts. Fortunately, man, like, none of those plans, came to fruition because, quite honestly, while like not even, I think it was like 18 days after he was released from prison. He committed a couple burglaries. He actually did commit another murder. In fact, this was like leading up to, one of the last murders that he, supposedly committed, out and about, out in the streets. I think it was like in Baltimore. And in fact, it was that and a burglary that got him hemmed up. No, it was the burglary that got him hemmed up, and where they took him back, or they took him to DC. But the reality is, like, while he was officially arrested in 1928 in Washington, it was like story didn't end there, right? It gets a little bit more, interesting, and this is really where he meets this young, or befriends. I wouldn't say meets. He befriends this young guard, Henry Lesser, right? 25 years old. Oh, by the way, like, if you watch the movie, um, Robert Sean Leonard, the guy who played Dr. Wilson off of House, plays this young guard, and I think he does a phenomenal job playing it. And
James Woods, right?
James
That's
Wood
who plays.
does Charles Panzer, yeah. So they do a phenomenal job. Honestly, man, like really, really bounce off of each other on,
I don't know if he's got the physicality. I don't think we said it yet, but Carl Panzram is like this huge guy, right?
Yeah.
He's like 6'4", 250 pounds, depending, right? He's like this big, burly ass dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if James Woods really has got the physical chops for that.
Oh,
I don't know.
Well, he had the creepiness, man. He played the role really good, dude. He did it really good, man. So, but anyways, so Carl Panzram, he meets Henry Lesser, again, 25-year-old guard, and immediately they have this, like, they pique each other's interest. In fact, I think it was like one of Henry Lesser's first couple of days on the job at that prison. He had already been there or been a prison guard, for about 7 to 8 months. But very early on, he just had like a simple response to him, because he was already intrigued, right? Clearly, Carl Panzram is a mature wolf, as he described himself, like someone extremely predatory inside prisons. Definitely, the guy in charge, the guy that he can do whatever he wants to. Quite honestly,
It was a what? I'm sorry.
Mature wolf. Yeah.
A wolf. Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So, he asked him, hey, like, what is it that, you did to deserve, being in here? And he was like, what I do, is I reform people. And, like, Henry Lesser just walked away with, like, dude, that is the most weird ass, question, or response to my, to my question. It's like, what the heck does that mean? So clearly stayed intrigued, wanted to figure out what was going on. Well, as he's like coming up, upon his shift, he's ready to like really actually like try to engage, Carl Panzram, really try to figure out what's going on. Well, he finds out that Carl's getting like tortured, getting his butt beat, you name it. It was, I can't recall at the time, but at this time, but like he's getting beat up, like completely tortured, getting his butt just handed to him. And I think as he's getting dragged along, I want to say, Henry Lesser recalls like seeing him just completely destroyed. Well, he hands. Well, I should mention, before, like Henry Lesser hands $1 to a trust, which is known as like a prisoner that could be trusted, to do certain duties or support the prison guards. I should mention that, that he finds out that the reason why Carl Panzram is just like, always without, special kind of treatment or food or, cigarettes or anything is because there's obviously a system in these prisons where, and still exists to this day where, certain jobs have, certain benefits, and some of those benefits are actually getting paid, or, prisoners can also receive money from the outside and any kind of support system. Well, of course, who's sending money to Carl Panzram? And then even worse, who's giving Carl Panzram like a job that's, paying inside the prison where he can buy himself, additional, type of candy, cigarettes, you name it. So none of that exists for this guy, right? He's abused, he's tortured, no respect. And, worst of all, he's getting, the worst treatment you can get in there because he's not able to provide himself or, any kind of special treatments. That said, so Henry Lesser gives $1 to the trust and telling the prisoner, I think, Simpson, right? Hey, like, hand this dollar to Carl, right? And he does, to the point where like Carl, like, halfway beaten, if you can imagine, dragged and just recently dropped in his cell, you know, the trust puts the dollar, I guess, in his pocket or something is the way he describes it. And needless to say, he starts laughing, like, yeah, sure, whatever, like he was like, no, I'm not joking. And he, like, I guess he checks the dollar. And as the story goes, the trust reported back to, Mr. Lesser that, hey, the guy, basically it was, he saw that Carl, tears started rolling down Carl Panzram's eyes, and, even made a comment, even made a comment, I think, to one of the guards. It was like, hey, how long has this guy been here? Like, oh, yeah, 9 months, but it was like, oh, he'll learn from it. But the next day, it was a complete different attitude. It was walked up to the bars, talked to him, thanked them for the dollar. He said no one has ever done that, ever in his life, and it's that small little gratitude, and you could tell Lesser, it went from intrigue to like, I gotta know, what is this guy's story? Why is like the dude that everybody is afraid of, the guy that continues to be completely brutalized in this prison, um, seem seem like a guy that, like, as soon as you get to know him, as soon as you get to talk to him, it was like there's that human factor that you were talking about, Chris, earlier, right? Is hey, he's still human at heart. There's still something there, Well, anyways, like, that doesn't last long before Carl Panzram find themselves getting tortured again, man. And this time, I think it's like for the worse, for I guess, like, the understanding Carl Panzram as a whole. He confessed to all these, like, countless crimes, exposed systematic failures and, like, law enforcement and penal systems, talk about all the things that he's done, why he was able to get away with what he did so many times, why he was able to, like, not only escape prisons, but also change aliases and commit other crimes and things that they don't even know about. Well,
yeah, and that's the book. That's the book that we read.
That's the book that we read, right? Is people were like, okay, there's no way these are some truths. Well, he starts developing this bond with Henry Lester so much that, like, to the point where it's like, hey, man, no one's believing me, but this is real. Like, all these confessions, everything that I've said in this tortures, it's real. So Henry Lester starts investigating, starts working with other states, and basically starts realizing that everybody's reported back to Henry Lester, like, yeah, like, we could corroborate those stories. Like, do you really got that guy? Do you got the Jeff Davis? Do you got the Jeff Davidson? Do you got the Baldwin? Whatever alias that Carl was pinched for at the time, they wanted him, right? And to the point where federal authorities had to, like, literally, like, mull over all these different requests from all these different states of, like, hey, no, man, we want him extradited here or extradited there. And Washington D.C. was basically like, no, like, this guy's going to remain here. He's going to.
He was wanted everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, I think what ends up happening is, like, I want to say he ends up confessing to a crime that pulls him back to another prison, or he gets transferred to another prison, and it was at that prison where, again, the little love that he did get, the little care that he did get, was behind him, was left in Washington, D.C. with this guard that just finally gave this guy the time of day and just gave him a little bit of, care and treatment, if you will. Goes to another, horrible, prison, if you will.
It was Leavenworth.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. That's right. They pull him back to Fort Leavenworth.
It was a federal. Yeah, it was like a bunch of federal crimes. Yeah.
Yeah, so. Exactly. That's what it was. And it wasn't, it was pretty short lived before he committed, like, one of probably the most heinous crimes, where they really opened up the floodgates of, like, okay, if this guy's willing to commit this, we got to explore everything else. And one of those crimes is obviously he murdered the foreman for, like, laundry service or something like that. And, coincidentally enough, he was on a rampage. He kept going on. He had timed everything out, just like everything he's done was probably premeditated for the majority of the crimes he committed, at least the heinous crimes. And he was looking for the deputy warden, went all the way to his office, missed him. Deputy warden was like, man, had I done my normal routine, I definitely would have been dead by now, because that's where Carl Panzram stayed locked up, right? Just waiting.
That part amazed me. That, I mean, the way that it reads is he just, like,
Yep.
slipped into a room with a crowbar.
Yep.
He just slipped away. And then when everybody else filed out of the room, he came
Yep.
out and he just fucking bashed some dude's head in. It was the foreman, right?
Yep.
And then he's like, "I'm not done," and he goes straight to the deputy warden's office. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
crazy.
No, it
Crazy.
was nuts. And what I thought was like he brings up the analogy to Lesser about the trust, right? He describes how like he was, not, I wouldn't say waiting for the trust, but he definitely was saying like, people were getting complacent. The guard got complacent and he was starting to, basically express enough trust to not just assume that Carl Panzram wasn't going to do anything, right? But of course, that guard, that foreman turned right around just to basically meet his death and get bashed in, by Carl Panzram. But I think what's even creepier is it was during that time in the letter to Lesser that he reminds Lesser of their encounter of trust, right? And I don't know if you remember, but he was talking about how like before Carl Panzram left from Washington D.C., there's that famous scene, where Henry Lesser went in or walked up to his cell and has to do his checks and tells Carl like, hey, man, what do you think of the crazy sunset or something like that, and Carl, always dealing with abuse his entire life,
Mm.
kind of almost turns and like then looks back and is like, hey, why do you want me to look at the sunset so bad? Basically saying like, you got that stick, ready to beat the crap out of me, because that's what he was so used to, was just getting beaten, getting completely destroyed in prison. And he was like, no, he was just like, but I also, because I gotta basically check the bars to make sure you're not getting out, part of the checks, right? And Carl Panzram reminds him in the letter, like, yeah, it was like, if you recall, basically, he walks up to the bar, Henry Lesser, with his back turned to Carl, turns right back around again with his back turned to Carl, and Henry Lesser,
He actually walks in his
yes,
cell.
he walks in his
Walks in
cell,
his cell to check the
check the
window
bars,
bars.
check the
Yeah.
window bars, walk with his back always turned to Carl, walks back out with his back turned to Carl, because at the angle that Carl was at least the way he describes it. And what Henry Lesser talks about, in fact, he doesn't really describe it so much in the autobiography. It was during an interview I saw this, that he says he could feel Carl walking up behind him as he was pulling the bars behind him to close
Oh
it.
shit.
And basically, Carl famously says, I remember reading this in the letter. He was like, I could, and in the interview, I could feel Carl coming up to the bars behind me. He said, "You're brave, but don't ever do that again. Turning your back on me like that." And then Lesser responds was like, "I'm not brave, Carl. I knew you wouldn't harm me because we're friends." And it's like, and Carl Panzram replied with, "Yes, you're the one man in the world I don't want to kill, but I'm so erratic, I'm liable to do anything." I was like, "Holy crap, man. Dude, this guy, like, talking,
Savage, bro.
yeah, completely insane." Well, again, he's writing these letters from Fort Leavenworth, reminding him about this story, but only to maintain that relationship and that communication with him, to continue to make sure his story gets out on everything from, again, his upbringing all the way till, fortunately for those whoever was in this guy's warpath, to finally get justice, because he was sentenced to death, um, ironically, just for killing that foreman, not for the entire rap sheet. But it was carried out on September 5th in 1930 at Fort Leavenworth, where they hanged him, as he said. But I will mention he had some famous last words, man. Kind of one of the four big talking points. I'm definitely going to close it out with. But he said, um, before he was dropped, it's, "Yes, hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard. I could hang a dozen men while you're fooling around." It's like, dude, and they describe the guy basically who like pulled the lever, just completely just shaken. Like, dude, it's like, how does this guy still has the audacity to call out, his executioner, so crazy. Yeah, yep. Yeah, I think this kind of goes into that, some of the last, things, for Carl Panzram, right? Like, what were some of the motivations, man? They were very descriptive in the book. He was driven by hatred, continuously wanted to do revenge against the world, and then like a philosophy that kind of rooted by force and survival, right? Like that's kind of what he had to do throughout the entire time. In fact, he writes to Henry Lesser and he says something that I think was pretty impactful, man. He goes on to explain that every child has some criminal tendencies. It's our place to correct those traits and teach them the right way to live while they are younger and their minds are forming. Then, when they do reach the age of reason and action, it will be quite natural for them to live clean, upright, and honorable lives. And that way, you will stop crime at its source before it begins. Basically, saying it's not hereditary, dude, but improper teaching, lack of knowledge, and environmental. Like, I was like, holy crap, man. Word for word,
Mm-hmm.
what he described to Henry Lesser, Then he talks about, like, the author of the book talks about, like, systematic failures, right? Things that we covered very early on, Chris, right? Childhood abuse, inhumane prison conditions, and societal neglect contributed to, like, hey, why was this guy continuing to commit some of these heinous crimes, man? Like, you add in all these other factors, and it's like, dude, this guy's not reforming. This guy's not getting better. No one's looking at, getting this dude some kind of level of support system, right?
Yeah.
And then I think, like, one of the, the takeaways that, the author, really highlights, in like, about the autobiography of, Carl Panzram was, like, let's think about the blaming society of creating criminals like himself, right? It's like, what is society to do to make it better? In fact, yeah, there's a the supposed letter, that's probably one of the big, things that I would like to read. It's anybody, and that most people agree on, right? Who's listened to Carl Panzram, it's, hey, they agree on 2 points. First, the criticism of the existing penal system at the time was definitely justified, man. That completely was clear. Second, the story, sparked, both a, like, psychoanalytical curiosity, but also, like, an interest in understanding, all right, what's this guy's full story? Because if we don't get it, we're never going to find out, what's the causation, I guess, for him to be, this, as you hear in Dexter, or, like, talk about this dark passenger, right? Why do he have this dark passenger that would, just want him, or cause him to, want to commit these crimes? But anyways, like, needless to say, man, like, they also agreed on, as it came to, like, his action or responsibility, is that he was definitely self-aware of taking responsibility of his stuff, but never accountability, right? It was blaming on everyone else. Let's shift that on. And he does that when he, and you could tell he agrees with that, or definitely believes in that, when he writes a response to that supposed letter. So you never get to hear all the 8 questions that basically Henry Lesser wrote to Panzram, but you do know that, like, it had something to do of, like, suppose you received a pardon, suppose you would have received financial backing, more support, and helping hand from people. Do you think you would have, reformed, right? Would you have had a better, productive life, right? Again, you don't see, unfortunately, that the letter was, from Lesser to Panzram was lost, but you do, like, you could tell what the letter must have completely said, because his response was, like, extremely telling, right? And I'll just mention a little bit. He hints at what scholars talk about when it comes to criminals. He says that most lose the ability to really understand and, like, and define, like, what is good, right? He talks about famous philosophers that he really studied on, and he didn't really, and he really talked about, how do you truly remain good, right? Like, he doesn't explicitly say the word virtues, but he's basically describing, like, he didn't have these qualities, he didn't have these virtues, and there's no way he would have completely been reformed. There's just, all the things that led up to, his first crime is, would have never been altered with any type of reformation, right? So that's just kind of the thing you mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of found, so there's 2 things that there was, like, a span of about 6 pages in the book where he really kind of lays out his philosophy. And one of the things that I kind of appreciated, because it also applies to today, is he scratched the surface on the prison industrial complex. And he said one of the reasons why he hates guards, he hates judges, he hates, wardens and everybody that's really associated with kind of the institution of a prison, because they all make their money on prisoners, on the fact that there's prisoners, and there's always going to be, like, there's more prisoners coming in. So he's saying there's really a conflict of interest there. You guys don't want to reform prisoners, prisoners are your source of income.
Yeah.
You are making money. You're sitting in an office, right, having this nice cushy job, living in a nice cushy house, eating really nice meals every day, right? Because of me, because of people like me. And me, I'm saying, as
Yeah.
Carl Panzram. And he's saying that's a conflict of interest. You guys would never want to get rid of your source of income. So why the fuck would you ever want to
Yeah.
try to reform prisoners,
Yep.
right? Which is true.
Yep.
Like on a larger
You hear
scale,
that? Yeah, a lot.
it kind of scratches the surface of the modern day, prison industrial complex. Is like, yeah, we like the United States uses prison labor
Yeah.
for a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
right? A lot of corporations use really cheap prison labor to manufacture things here or to assemble things here in the United States and sell them at, market price or even a little bit below market price. And, so big companies like Walmart or whatever. And so there really is no appetite on a
Yeah.
large scale to help to reform anything
Or
that
incentivization, right? Like, why would a
there's no
private
incentive.
private
There's no
corporation,
incentive to help
Yep.
to
Yep.
help youth
Yep.
do better so that they don't end up in prison, right? So it's just as applicable as it is today. And the other thing that I found really interesting was he towards the end there, like his last stint in prison from the time that he got into Leavenworth at the time that he was hanged,
Yep.
right, which was a couple of year period. He actually he found a lot of, I don't know, interest, I would say. I don't know. I don't want to say solace, right? He found a lot of interest in reading philosophy books. And
Yeah.
to me, that means that he's kind of like wrestling with the morals of what he was doing.
Yeah.
And like I said, that's the 6-page span in his book. It kind of, and you were kind of getting after it a little bit. I found it interesting. He knew
Yeah.
that everything that he did was bad. He knew that he was an immoral person, but at the same time, he shifted blame away from himself and he put it back on society. He said, "It's your fault. You're the one that raised me like this. You're
Yeah.
the one that put me in this institution. You're the one that fucking raped me so many
Yeah.
times. You're the one that beat me. You're the one that, starved me and everything that the prison system did to him. It's like, it's your fucking fault because you didn't have any support for somebody like me. And so, you know what? You guys made your bed and you're going to lay in it. And as long as you keep doing that, there's going to keep being people like me that's just going to, raise hell, burn stuff, rape people, pillage villages, and just generally want to watch the world burn again." And so he kind of shifts a little bit of blame away from himself and saying that, he is simply the product of a system. He is almost, kind of a force of nature, right? It's like, it's your fault. This is happening. This is the system that's set up. So you know what? You have to deal with me. And
it was challenging, man.
I shed a little bit of blame for that. And yeah, so I found that very interesting. That's kind of how he closed out or dealt with the things that he did. And so it's clear to me that, he does understand the difference between good and bad. He does have morals. He is a human, right? He did take an interest in philosophy and like good and bad, like, right, Nietzsche, right? He's got a book called Beyond Good and Evil. So this is clearly something that really, really clouded his thoughts a lot towards the end, as he was trying to, I guess, wrestle with what he had done for his entire life and what he had known to be good versus what he had known to be bad. So I found that very interesting.
I agree, man. I think in closing, man, that, just some of the things that, I walked away with, both between the book and really even the movie, man, really depicted, a lot of what the other interviews and things, things that they captured from, people who, talked about the various things that happened through Carl Panzram on those various, major prisons, right? It's like, 4 points. First, it's that final letter that he does to Henry Lesser, where, as he's like serving those last months, with great food, no abuse, plenty of support and respect from, really all the guardsmen, as he's, on what we would now know as like death row, essentially, right? Or know as death row. He famously like put in the letter, "If I had been treated as I am now, fewer people would have been robbed, raped, or killed." It's like, dude, like, finally on his last couple months, this guy's claiming that, he's finally getting the support, the respect, and, and like no abuse, right? And second, again, those last words before the execution, right? Just kind of morbid, that this guy's like, "Yes, hurried up, I could have killed a dozen men, while you're fooling around here." It's like, dude, what the heck, man? Like, You
He's
know,
ready
like
to
just,
check out.
yep, ready to check out. You know, like don't call me insane. I'm ready to go, man. Like ready to get out of this body, right? Third is like Panzram's story. Dude, it's a grim reminder of everything you just talked about, it man. Like systematic abuse, the penal system, the neglect that we have, like for like that continue to create like all these cycles of violence. Because what are we doing, man? We're like not doing things to fix, like the morality around like our communities, the justice system, or doing that, what you mentioned earlier, that systematic accountability, which even the like the authors of the book are having trouble with. It's like, dude, how did we allow this to continue, and how do we continue to allow this today? What are we doing to break that cycle? And I think the last thing, if you listen into Carl Panzram and this serial killer, is like, all that said, okay, dude, so what does it teach us, about like our own society? What are we doing, and can we actually break those cycles, man? It's one thing to know that they continue to exist. It's, can we actually break them, and who's looking to breaking them, right? So that's that's how I think, sums up this story of, Carl Panzram, serial killer. Yeah, boom, done.
All right.
Man.